In this video, I'd like to add pieces to our Mancala game board. I'm going to do that by defining an array called bin amount, which will keep track of the number of stones in each of these bins. There are 14 bins, so my array is going to have a fixed length of 14. And I can define it by typing an equal sign and then a pair of brackets and entering 14 values separated by commas. Now, at the beginning of the game, you should know that 4 stones are placed in each of the 6 bins on the lower side and each of the 6 bins on the upper side of the board. And at the ends, in the Mancalas, nothing is placed there. So I want 6 4s followed by a 0, and then another 6 4s followed by another 0. And that's the basic structure for my game. So what I'd like to do is include those values in my print commands down here. But these stones are going to be moved around and collected in different places on the game board. Since there are 48 of them, it's very possible for the amount to be a double-digit number, a 2-digit number. So since some values might have just 1 digit and others might have 2, we need to adjust them to make them consistent and make the board look nice. So to make these adjustments inside the while loop, I'm going to add a for loop, but just before the for loop, I want an indexing variable, I, that I'll set equal to 0. And then the for loop is defined with the command for. The difference between a for loop and a while loop is that a for loop runs for a fixed amount of time. And I want it to go once through the loop for every element of the bin amount array. So I'm going to use a variable element to just work through the bin amount array. So element in bin amount will do that for me. Again, I want to end this with a colon, and my next line, tabbed over 1, will be within the body of the for loop. Now, in this space, I'm going to use an if command to check to see if the bin amount at index I is less than 10. And notice that I'm using this symbol int to make sure that the bin amount value is treated as an integer. To get into the if statement, I want to end this with a colon, and if this is true, if the bin amount is less than 10, it means that it just has a single digit, so the printed expression needs an extra space so that I can take up 2 digits in my game board. So what I'll do is define the bin amount at index I to be a string str that includes the bin amount at index I, but also in front of that, just a space. So the plus sign here is concatenating the 2 strings. It's taking a single space and adding it in front of the bin amount number. If that's not true, if the bin amount number is not less than 10, I want to do something different. So I'm going to use an else command. So the command else followed by a colon, and this time the bin amount at index I want this to simply be equal to the bin amount value as a string, because in this case it will be a 2-digit number. So before we get out of the for loop, I want to increment I. So I want to add 1 to the value of the I variable. So notice the tabbing here. I'm in line with the if and the else. So I'm not under the if command, I'm not under the else command, but I am still inside the for loop. So I could add, just again to signal this, that we're outside of the for loop at this point. And now you may have noticed, to reference specific values inside the bin array, we use brackets and then with the index value inside. So on the game board, I'm going to place that first value from the bin array in this lower left corner, not quite in the Mancala, but in this lower left space right here. So to include that, I'm going to take 2 spaces away, which is where my number is now going to go. I'm going to add parentheses with plus signs in between. And then between those plus signs, I'm going to add the bin amount, specifically at index 0. So this first number will get printed in that first bin. So let's check this by running the code. And we see it. We see a 4 right there. Again, we have our command here, so I can press Q to quit. If I press something other than Q, notice what happens. An extra space gets added to my game board, and that's no good. So let's try to adjust that. So now to eliminate that problem, one thing we can do is enter a line in front of the if-else structure. I want to make sure that initially the bin amount is interpreted as an integer. So if I enter bin amount at index I and set it equal to the integer value of the bin amount. So if there's any extra spaces in that bin amount, they'll get removed when it becomes interpreted as an integer instead of a string. And so we can see that now if we run the code again and run it a second time by typing in some random letter like A, we don't see those extra spaces this time. So one more thing I want to show. All of the current entries in the bin amount array have a single digit. So if I change that first 4 to a 24, notice what happens. If I run the code, I see a 24. And there's no shifting in the vertical lines. The bins are all nicely lined up because we're taking both of those spaces that we set aside for the number. We're taking both of those spaces. So we need to spread these around the game board, and I'll actually do that at the start of the next video. We'll spread the bin amount values around the game board, and then also add a player 1 and a player 2 to our game.